Well, good morning, everyone, and it is a real pleasure for me to be back here in Canberra after exactly 10 years. The last time I came was also to give a presentation at the ABERS conference. I'm going to give you something a little bit different. I'm sorry to disappoint you a little bit. I won't talk a lot about African swine fever. That is indeed one of the big things that affect the global meat industry. But I would rather like to propose to you a bit of a pep talk, I guess you could call it, on the state of the livestock industry, both here in Australia and its context in the rest of the world. Because we have all heard in the media for quite a long time now, it's a recurring theme that somehow the livestock sector and eating meat is detrimental to the environment, that it is a serious negative in terms of the climate change discussions. And my thesis to you, my argument to you this morning is that we can actually, as an industry, the livestock and meat industry, be the heroes in this discussion. And we're not going to actually have much of a choice. We cannot continue business as we have done in the past, because if we are not proactive in helping to convince the public and policymakers in particular who have an impact on our activities, if we are not successful in convincing them of the benefits that we bring to the table, then we will be relegated to has-beens. But I want to be optimistic, and I don't think that that's going to happen. I think that we really need to be and will be the heroes. So I'm not going to go too much about what the International Meat Secretariat is. Just suffice it to say at this point that it is a private sector, non-profit, global voice for the livestock sector, the red meat sector that is. The red meat sector is including the ruminants, pork. And basically think of it this way: in Australia you have Meat and Livestock Australia, you have Australian Pork Limited covering the two main livestock species. They are members of our organization. We are a global organization, so we are represented in more than 30 different countries around the world. You can imagine these are the 30 most important countries, regions in livestock production, and together we represent more than 3/4 of global meat production and consumption. Okay, so as I said earlier, I think that we can be the heroes in the discussion of the challenges. We can be part of the solution. We are part of the solution for sustainable development. We are part of the solution for food nutrition security. The discussion on environment and climate change is a particularly difficult one, or has been a particularly difficult one for us. Quite simply, I think because of the diversity of the production systems around the world, it is a complex story to explain. There's not a one story fits all. And so it's very difficult to make very flashy news headlines, except in a negative sense when you just sort of blanket coat the whole industry with just a negative side of the story. And of course, consumer expectations and we were just talking, the previous speaker, about millennials, but it's also true of basically consumers in general. They have changing expectations, and basically they're in one direction. They are increasing expectations about quality, about health, about environmental impact, about animal welfare. All right, so let's quickly talk about the first two: sustainable development and food nutrition and security. Again, I want to repeat myself. We should be seeing ourselves as part of the solution, an integral part of the solution in sustainable development and food nutrition security. I don't want to go into the details of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 of them. Just to make the point that in most of these, the livestock sector, through its contributions to economic activity, for example, for the no poverty goal, life on Earth, we do have a critical role to play in all of these sustainable development goals. I think it's the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome, that is actually on record saying that livestock is critical to the livelihoods of close to 1 billion of the poorest of the poor in the world. Okay, so we cannot ignore that. All right, let me just also briefly tell you about the global agenda for sustainable livestock. There's a web link below that you'll be able to click for further information on that. I'm sorry, that's unfortunate choice of colors. It doesn't show up very well. But when you get the copy of the presentation, you'll be able to click on that link. And basically, this is a multi-stakeholder platform that's been running for now about 7 or 8 years. And the uniqueness of this platform, it is hosted by the Food and Agriculture Organization, but we have participation from stakeholders in the public sector, in other words, governments, from the private sector, and in the private sector, the International Meat Secretariat is there on behalf of the red meat industry. The International Dairy Federation is there on behalf of the dairy producers. The Poultry Council and the International Egg Commission are there for the poultry products. You get the idea. And of course, there are the NGOs, World Wildlife Fund, the pastoralism groups. So it really is a multi-stakeholder discussion. And the discussion is about how do we foster or move forward the ideas needed to improve sustainability of the livestock sector for the goals of sustainable development. I really recommend this to you as an industry. This is something that we have been working very hard with our partners at the FAO and our other private sector partners, but also with NGOs. If we want to have a useful discussion and convince people, we also need to reach out to our critics. I think we all understand that. Okay, so basically there's more information on that you'll be able to find on the website. There's certainly not enough time today to go into all of the activities of this. Just a last word on that. They do hold an annual multi-stakeholder platform meeting. This year it will be held in June in Switzerland. And I do believe that as it is an annual meeting, they are always looking for hosts, and why not in the near future have it hosted by AirBears here in Australia. All right, so let's move on then to environment and climate change. Again, I want to emphasize we are part of the solution. And just to make the point that, we are, I'm talking globally now, the global livestock industry, one of the reasons why it is so difficult to explain ourselves is because of the diversity, obviously the different climate. And here in Australia, I understand that you have a particularly challenging climate environment for livestock. And you are working on mainly very extensive systems, very subject to drought and other extreme events, unfortunately. And unfortunately, it seems getting worse as the climate changes and is basically heating up in the case of Australia. But I do want to make the point that in order for producers, and those of you who are producers here in the audience know this far better than I, in order for environmental choices to actually be effective, they actually need to also align with economic choices. In other words, you're not going to be able to continue, if you can't continue your business, how can you make it more green? How can you make it more environmentally friendly? So it is absolutely essential that you are able to make a decent living. Livestock is in the very interesting position of being a participant in, or of being a potentially significant participant in carbon sequestration. So unlike other industries that are polluting, like transportation, which are only really extractive industries taking carbon out of the soil, putting it through our petrol engines and then spewing it up into the air. In the case of livestock, it is actually largely a circular path. And not only that, by better management of our resources, in particular land, so that it is so that we increase soil carbon content, we can actually capture some of that carbon and put it back in the soil, and therefore help with climate change. And I want to salute the industry supported effort, the livestock industry supported effort here in Australia that's being hosted by Meat and Livestock Australia on your Carbon Neutral 30 initiative. I do believe it is the first initiative of its kind that is at a national level, and it is very ambitious and being looked at with a lot of interest by many of your peers in different countries. I think that the Brazilians also have an initiative at a more limited level. They have two kinds of beef that they are marketing. One that is a carbon neutral beef, but it's not covering their entire beef production. And they have another one that is a low carbon beef. But I also want to assure you that your partners around the world, at least in the organizations, associations that are member of the International Meat Secretariat, that they have been working very hard on sustainability as a whole. And as we all know, sustainability is not just about carbon emissions, methane emissions in the case of livestock. It is also about improvements in animal welfare. It is also about economic contributions. It's also about improvements in biodiversity through better management of our lands. It's also about the circular economy, better use of our resources, better use of water, less food waste. And one thing, for example, that the livestock sector is often not credited with is actually the reduction of food waste. Let me explain that to you in a minute. Okay, there are a lot of numbers here. I just want to focus on a few numbers here just to put you in the context, African swine fever and the impact on China. If you look at the numbers in the red box on the top left, the total global production of pork, 106 million metric tons in 2019, or that was the forecast. And if you look in the top right-hand corner, China, and their production of pork in a normal year would be roughly half of that. So normally about 50 and change, 55, let's say. And in actual fact, last year, because of African swine fever, a significant reduction in that production level. So this chart, the other figures, don't worry too much about them. They're just putting together here basically the top 5 or 6 countries or regions in the world for the production of each kind of meat. All right, let's move on in the interest of time. All right, yes, so, what could be worse for the Chinese than to have African swine fever in the year of the pig? And my heart really goes out to them. As you know, this is the most important preferred meat for the Chinese. As a long cultural history, they absolutely love it, and to have that happen in the year of the pig, terrible. And then as if things weren't bad enough, now we have this COVID-19. And really, there's a ray of hope in that we are seeing that the number of cases of COVID-19, the rate of increase is decreasing, if that makes sense. Yeah, but it seems to be, the situation seems to be turning around, and maybe we can hope that in the case of the rest of the world, that we will also be able to follow a similar path. We are all very worried in the coming days and weeks about the evolution of this virus, and we, of course, are very much want to be optimistic that we will be able to move through this as expeditiously, as efficiently as we can. And looking at what the Chinese have done, full credit to them for once having recognized the problem, for taking the necessary measures to do it. And I was watching the ABC News last night, and I heard, I think, your authorities saying that, well, in Australia, we may have to soon consider doing things that may seem shocking to some people, shocking in terms of telling them what they can do, restricting their movements. But, the Chinese have credit to them. They have shown us some of the things that we must be prepared to do in order to contain this. Okay, so in quantitative terms, what was the impact, or what is the projected impact of African swine fever on pork production in China? Well, just to briefly summarize, this is a very information-dense slide. I'm not going to go into it, but just to say that recovery is going to take a few years, that's for sure, and that's for several reasons. One is that in the Chinese pig industry, there is still a significant part of production that's coming from small production units. In other words, backyard farmers, people that just have pigs because it's not that it's a hobby, but it's a convenient thing. It's like a garbage can in the back, but one that is actually clean, green, and friendly, and that you can feed it anything you want, and you get some meat out of it. But that also means that those animals are in direct contact with the vector of African swine fever, which is, of course, totally inoffensive to us humans, but very, very mortally dangerous to pigs, and it is spread through the feral pig population. And these backyard producers, they are at constant risk of retransmitting this disease. And that is one of the reasons why it has been so difficult for China to get this thing under control. And it is also one of the reasons why the recovery will take several years. And it depends entirely on what government policy will be vis-a-vis these small producers, because it is clear that, or at least I think it's clear that they're not going to be able to get rid of all the feral pigs in China or anywhere else in the world. And so if that's the case, then the small producers do eventually have to go and make way for the types of production units in which you can separate the animals from feral pigs. Okay, so bottom line here, there is likely to be a loss, and this is conservative, of about 24 million metric tons of pork. And if you recall back to the earlier slide, the total world production in any given year is about 55, 60 million metric tons of pork. That is a massive, massive quantity. And it is so massive that basically a lot of Chinese people have been going without pork, all right? Because at that level of reduction in production, there's just no way to make it up. There's no way. World trade is far, far less than that. It's only a fraction of the 24 million metric tons. So no matter which region of the world you look to, you only get a minuscule quantity of the pork that they would normally like to buy. So you can imagine then that prices have shot through the roof, and with consequences for other meats, including beef and chicken. And the worry in all of this for us in the red meat sector is that a lot of that pent-up demand will go to the white meats, so the chicken, which is also traditionally in Asian countries a meat that is heavily consumed. It is also the cheaper protein. So that is a bit of a worry in terms of for us in the red meat industry. Will we get those consumers back when this is all over? All right, so let me go very quickly to some very specifics about meeting some of these challenges, in particular meeting consumer expectations. Just to say that, well, this is a very Eurocentric view here, but I suspect that you also have a similar thing here in Australia and many other countries. The consumer and citizen will be becoming much more demanding towards food and the way it is produced, and in particular its impact on environment and climate change. And that is because of a number of things. Let me just talk a little bit about the health concerns. And just, to put it on record, there is no good scientific evidence that singles out any particular food to be bad for your health. What can be bad for health is your diet and your pattern of consumption. So let's have that clear. And in particular, there is no specific type of food that has been shown scientifically to be cancer causing. And you may recall there was a bit of controversy about an IARC report on processed meat and cancer. All right, just very quickly, this is the per capita consumption of meat around the world. And if you look on the extreme left, it's basically developed countries. On the extreme right, basically developing countries, and the Asian countries would be somewhere towards the right, say. And just getting back to the point made earlier about the growing incomes there, and those growing incomes will be asking for more meat. So globally, there is, I would say, a very optimistic outlook in terms of the demand for meat. It's just that growth is probably going to be in developing countries, and in developed countries, we are rather seeing a stagnation or a decline in per capita meat consumption. I don't have time to talk about the Eat Lancet report, but it's a bit of an elitist, biased, not scientifically well-founded study. So can I be honest about that? But basically, just to say, basically, they have decided to start with the premise of how do we reduce environmental impact to the minimum. What do we consider, what do we assume is the most environmentally damaging? We assume it's livestock. And then how do we reduce that to the bare minimum and tell people to eat 28 grams a day? And it is just not, there's good information in there, and it's a good discussion to have, but it is based on a lot of biases. And let me just leave it at that. Well-meaning but misguided policy advice. All right. So my plea to anybody that is looking at that discussion is use your heads. We're all intelligent people, and we can decide for ourselves. You don't need to trust me and my biased opinion. I'm from the livestock sector. Of course, I would say that, but use be intelligent and look at the facts. All right, okay, so just to rehash a little bit what I've been saying all along, we need livestock to be sustainable. We've all heard these numbers about the numbers of kilograms of protein that you need, of feed that you need to convert into a kilogram of meat. It's a bit of a nonsensical way to look at it because a kilogram of plant protein is not the same as a kilogram of meat protein, not in nutritional terms, not in taste terms, et cetera, et cetera. And if you actually do the calculation on average globally for ruminants, for every 0.6 kilograms of edible protein, you get 1 kilogram of meat. That's a factor greater than 1, so we're upscaling and we're actually producing more from what we put in, okay? All right, and earlier I was talking about the circularity of the fact that the livestock sector does not get credit for reducing food waste, and we're using a lot of co-products. So think of vegetarians as your friends. When you produce food for vegetarians, there is a lot of waste, and that waste has to go somewhere, and as a livestock industry, we're using that waste. All right, so think of vegetarians as your friends in that way. All right. So, in the interest of time, you can read these for yourself, but basically I have some sources for you, some specific numbers about really what a more balanced view of the impact, environmental impact of the livestock sector. And just to give you a list of the main international organizations at which the International Meat Secretariat is working on your behalf to talk about the livestock sector's real contributions. And just to say that we will be stronger if we work closer together. And as a livestock sector, we're not good at that, I'm sorry to say, so we need to be better than that. But also I want us all to be proud that we can contribute to sustainability and we will feed the world. Thank you very much.